Just like so many other sports organisations around the world, New Zealand Rugby has been impacted by COVID, and today we found out the extent of that. So they had a $34 million loss. 18 million of that was the operating budget. So they needed to go out and get some capital. Now, this whole thing with Silver Lake has been in discussion for the last 6 to 9 months, and today it was unanimously voted on by the 26 provincial unions. They want it to go ahead, but there's still one big hurdle to jump before it can actually be signed off.
And Zoe, what is that hurdle?
Well, there's a bit of opposition, mainly from the New Zealand Rugby Players Association. They have to get clearance, give clearance before this gets signed off. Now, they have been in collective bargaining and mediation with New Zealand Rugby now 4 weeks, and they've said that they will not come back to the table for at least a few weeks. They've got to get together with the players, talk about what they want, their concerns, before they come back to the table with New Zealand Rugby. But New Zealand Rugby said that they want to negotiate with them fairly. They do want to understand where the players are coming from and listen to their concerns. And so it's still going to be a few weeks yet. But the main concerns for the players are primarily looking after our taonga, our most important elements of the game. So not only our All Blacks, but also our things like the haka and the All Blacks jersey. They're afraid under this agreement that we are going to lose the ownership of that, or our Māori culture will be misappropriated. So that's one of the major concerns. Another concern has been whether or not Silver Lake will be able to dictate how many games the All Blacks play on the international stage. New Zealand Rugby have said that that's not the case, and they will continue to put that into play.
So if New Zealand Rugby is in such trouble, why is it financially attractive to an investor, and what part of the game are they actually selling?
Well, so they're selling the commercial entity of it. They're looking at international broadcast rights, merchandising, ticketing. It's the commercial aspect of it. I mean, if you're a New Zealander, you know how much the All Blacks and rugby means to our culture and to New Zealand. I mean, you're kind of born with a rugby ball.
It's absolutely everything, so, isn't it?
But we're talking about, $387 million here. That's the equivalent of about 360 million Australian dollars. That's only 12.5% share. And what New Zealand Rugby proposes to do with that money is to filter it down through to the provincial unions, and also help the growth of the youth game, Māori and Pacifica engagement, and the women's game. They would like to see either a semi-professional or professional women's league out of this.
And talking of women, New Zealand Rugby is still having difficulties meeting some of the criteria with regard to proper female representation. You were the only woman at the press conference, so I guess you know what that feels like. Why are they still struggling to meet those targets?
That's a really good question. So back a few years ago, the New Zealand government introduced the Women and Girls in Sport strategy to try and engage more women and girls in sport in New Zealand. And with that strategy, every sports body that received more than $50,000 in government funding must have a quota, reach a quota of 40% females on their board by the end of the year. Well, today, New Zealand Rugby remain at 2, which is approximately 28%, which for me is slightly concerning, considering that the vast majority of the other sports bodies have been able to either get to the 40% or exceed that 40%. Now, they actually risk losing hundreds of thousands of dollars in government funding by not reaching that. So it will be fascinating to see whether or not the government will enforce it. On the flip side, New Zealand Rugby are making moves to ensure that they have equality, 50-50 gender split on their provincial boards in the coming years, and hopefully we'll see more women feed up through that system.
Zoe, talking of the government, why did New Zealand Rugby not approach the government? It's your national game after all. Why did the government not potentially come to the rescue?
Well, actually, they already have. The government gave New Zealand Rugby approximately $5-6 million in our wage subsidy. So any business in New Zealand was able to apply for that. And several, actually most of our sports bodies did apply for that. And we're talking about millions of dollars. In fact, New Zealand Rugby were the biggest benefactors of that wage subsidy. So they have already had a bit of a handout from the government. I'm really fascinated to hear more discussions around, what it might look like to have New Zealand Rugby on the New Zealand Stock Exchange. But for now, it looks like the private equity will be the way to go. Now, also, this is not the first time that Silver Lake have invested in a sports organisation. They have a share in Man City and actually in Melbourne City, A-League team, and in the UFC. So sport is not new to them. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens over the next few weeks, particularly with the players. And, I think New Zealanders are slightly worried about giving up a piece of the All Black pie.
Yeah, you can't blame them really at all. Good to talk, Zoe. Thanks so much.
Go well.